All right. Hello, world history people. Today we're going to learn about the Black Death. And as you can see, I am very prepared for this terrible point in history. And a lot of people could say that 2020 is having kind of a similar effect. But I'll teach you all about this fancy mask that I'm wearing right here and why they thought this was a good idea to solve the plague. So let's go ahead and jump on in and let's learn about the bubonic plague. Let's do it. So, yeah, this dude's infected with the plague. As you can see, his body's terribly messed up. It's not looking good for him. And here's a bunch of people slowly dying, dead bodies in the streets, dead babies in the streets. Oh, that's rough. And then, yeah, here's all those people with those cool masks, like this one I have right here. Okay, so the word you gotta know is pandemic, a disease that spreads all around the world. And I'm sure a big pandemic in world history is now going to be the coronavirus or the COVID-19 pandemic. That's one we're currently living through right now. But pandemics are some serious stuff. And I don't think even the COVID-19 pandemic is going to get as bad as the Black Death was. This one was really, really hardcore. And the reason why this pandemic was so bad is because the Mongols had allowed for easy trading and movement all around the world. So this pandemic flowed along the trade routes and it went faster and it just killed so many people because the whole world was interconnected along those trade routes. So here's death bringing its death around everywhere. And this is the pattern which the plague spread. So history has some pretty good accounts that in 1345 it was here, but then 3 years later it gets all the way to Europe. Okay, so this is what we know now. We've done some deep studying about the Black Death, and we figured it out. People of that time had no idea of this information, so if you do ever travel back in time and the Black Death is going on, you could share this with people and they would be really appreciative. But the Black Plague exists in the blood of rats, and it technically still exists in the world today, but we have medicine that could treat it. And the question is, how does the blood of rats get inside of humans? Well, it was transferred by these little fleas and ticks that would suck the blood from a rat, and then the flea would still have some of that blood on its, like, I don't know, flea nostrils or its flea mouth, and then the flea would jump over to a human, it would bite the human, and there even that tiny bit of plague rat blood would get in the human's blood, and then it would just explode the disease inside of a person. But then, once a person is infected, well, all of the person's blood, all of their bodily fluids, their mucus, their saliva, their tears even, everything had the Black Death in it. And they could spread it to more humans from there. So history has found out this plague started in China. It feels like every plague starts in China. And it spread all over the Eurasian North African world. As a result, 30% of people on planet Earth will die. This was a huge devastation to the world population. So much death. It was really bad. All right, so this is what the Black Death looks like under a microscope. It doesn't look all that serious, but it affects your blood and it'll kill you. And those rats and the fleas sucking up blood. And here's the whole process right there. So flea drinks rat blood. The bacteria multiplies in the flea's gut. The flea's gut gets clogged with bacteria. The flea bites a human and regurgitates the blood into the human's wound. All right, so what would happen if you got the Black Death? Short answer is, it's real bad. Like you gonna die, and it's gonna be super duper painful. So let's get into this. The disease always started with the emergence of tumors, also known as buboes, which is why people call it the bubonic plague. And these tumors would grow on your groin area, sort of near your private parts, or in your armpits. And they're just these kind of big tumor-looking things. And eventually those tumors would pop, and a whole bunch of, like, pus and blood and terrible smelling stuff would come out of it. Sometimes those tumors turn black. Yeah, it's pretty bad. They would grow as big as an apple or an egg. Also, your fingers and toes would turn black, and that's actually a natural part of the human immune system because
When your body recognizes there's not a lot of good blood to go around, it'll focus that blood on your main organs to keep you alive in your brain. So your body will purposely stop sending blood to your fingers and toes because you could live without those. And eventually the fingers and toes will rot away and decay. Your fingers and toes could literally fall off. Um, but the problem is the disease typically did infect people's entire bloodstreams. So these tumors, these black spots, they would start to grow in people's primary organs as well. Most patients died from being unable to breathe. I mean, your lungs, they need a whole lot of oxygenated blood to work correctly. And when there's not a lot of good blood to go around, the lungs don't work. So it's not a good disease. Really, really bad. Thankfully, if this disease does come back today, we do have modern science that will save people. So, but that's because we've seen it in the past. This COVID-19 thing is so brand new, science doesn't know what to do. All right, moving on. So those are some of those buboes growing in people's groin area. Here's a bubo on someone's neck. Fingers start to go black with decay. And yep, ugh, that's really gross. And then this is what it would look like. All these little pops popping off, blood. Ugh, really bad. Really, really bad. Okay, so the plague was exceptionally terrible in the Middle East and Europe, where 50 to 75% of all people died. Because remember, I told you 30% of people on planet Earth died, but the majority of those deaths were in Europe and the Middle East. And when you lose 75% of your population, that's going to be like a big reset button on your society. The vast majority of people are dead. Like, you got to reorganize almost everything. So let's deep dive into Europe right now. Europeans, they really had no idea how this plague was transpiring. They made so many mistakes. They had no idea about the whole rat and flea thing. During this entire period, there was this false medical belief that the plague must exist in the air. This is a concept called miasma, and it's just bad medical science. Okay. They also, because this was such a Christian period, it's still like medieval times, and Christianity controls all thinking and thought. People believed that this was an event determined by God, and when half the population is dying, they're going to open up the Bible to the very last parts of the Bible, talking about the end of the world and the rapture. And that's what people really thought was happening. So they took this whole end of the world stuff real seriously, and things are going to get nasty on the cultural end, not only in the health end of this epidemic or pandemic. So yeah, here's some babies getting buboes. That's really bad. Yeah, this disease especially killed kids. Super rough. There they are praying to God, and then Europe's just totally going nuts. All right. So they made a lot of really bad medical decisions to counteract the plague. First of all, as soon as one person in your family got the plague, you would call up all your relatives, you'd bring grandma in, you'd bring the babies in, and you'd all sort of like touch the people, kiss the people, pray on them by touching them, asking God to save them. But all of that close proximity and all that touching and sharing of the bodily fluids with kissing and stuff, that would actually just spread the disease even more. And then when the disease was hitting a community really bad, the priest would be like, everybody come to church and we'll all pray together and we'll touch hands on the people who are sick and God will help them. It didn't work, okay? More and more people contracted the plague. And then this is something that wasn't just plague-wise. Like during the Middle Ages, there was also this belief that people were sick because they had bad blood. And, well, weirdly enough, that logic was actually true with the Black Plague. But what they did, though, was they said, you have bad blood, we're going to put these leeches all over your body, these slimy slugs that suck your blood, and the leeches will suck your bad blood, and then you'll be more healthy. Well, the problem is the leeches would suck people's blood, but then they wouldn't get any blood back in. Like, they didn't have blood transfusions back then. And typically they would put these leeches around people's heart and their their main torso part of their body. So the leeches are actually sucking the little bit of good blood they have. And every once in a while, the leeches would, of course, suck blood containing the Black Plague, and then the medieval doctor would pick off those leeches, put them in a bowl, and then go to another person's house and give those same leeches on that person. So now you're cross-contaminating blood and spreading the disease even more. All right, so I'm kind of the argument I'm trying to make here is just about everything they did to stop the Black Death actually only aided the Black Death's transmission. So let's keep checking it out. Now, here's these people with buboes. Priest is praying on him, and there they are putting leeches on this guy, so supposedly sucking out his bad blood. And yeah, here's just a couple really silly things that they did back then too. Because so many of these buboes were these big white lumps on people's necks that sort of looked like an egg. It was roughly the same size. It was just kind of underneath your skin. People of this time period widely believed that if you strapped a chicken to someone's neck, if they had a bubo on their neck, the chicken would somehow like suck up this egg underneath your skin and it would go inside the chicken. Okay, like that obviously didn't happen, but you would go back in time and you'd see people with chickens tied to their necks. It's ridiculous. Also, people said, hey, if you just drink some mercury or arsenic, then the plague will go away. Well, mercury and arsenic are poisons, okay? And I guess maybe if you had a teeny tiny amount and somehow that went to the right part of your body. But no, that almost never worked, okay? People were poisoning themselves and people were then dying from poison. Another widely held belief was if you ever found a unicorn and ground its horn into a powder and drank the powder, you would save yourself from the plague. Well, there were a whole lot of people looking for unicorns and they never found one. And another thing, too, because there was this belief that the disease existed in the air, and when people were sick, they smelled really bad, they said, well, if we just get a lot of sweet-smelling flowers, those flowers will purify the air, and it'll make sure the plague doesn't spread. Well, flowers tend to attract bugs and fleas, so that was just increasing the spread even more. A whole lot of ignorance back then, and we definitely got to learn some lessons about the mistakes these people made. And then check this out. Here's a plague doctor trying to poke someone's bubo in their armpit, and you can see the plague doctor, he's not wearing any kind of protective gear for himself, so he doesn't have any gloves or a mask. So if that stuff explodes on him, it's going to get nasty, and he'll probably get the plague too. All right, here's another guy just getting deep in there, like looking right at the bubo as he pops it, and it's gonna just gush all this plague blood all over him. So that's really bad. And then here's the thing: like so many people died during this time. They did not individually bury people; they just put them all in mass graves. And a lot of these mass graves, I mean, you just dig them up, okay? Like these are in Reims, France. All these dead bodies from the plague so long ago. Bang, so many dead people. All right, but now we get to the part that I just think is fun. So eventually, plague doctors were continuing to die from the plague, and they came up with actually a pretty good idea. They said, we don't know how this disease is transmitting, but we want to still help people and cure people. So what we'll do is we will cover ourselves in kind of an early version of the hazmat suit. Okay, so the plague doctors had this idea we're going to completely protect our bodies, and they especially thought the disease was from the air. So what they did was they designed this fancy kind of mask right here, and they would fill the beak part, and they would fill it all the way to the brim with strong smelling flowers. And so, you know, if you actually looked inside of a plague doctor's mask back then, it would just be full of roses and rosemary and all that stuff. And the bodysuits that the plague doctors wore were actually generally effective. In the couple pictures I have here, they're not wearing gloves. That's a mistake. But eventually, the plague doctors did wear gloves, and their survivability rates went up a lot. So that's pretty cool. Plague doctors. All right, so yep, that long beak of flowers, or held flowers and herbs to shield them from death. And there's what one of these masks looked like. Yeah, I don't know why he's not wearing gloves. That's a mistake. But yeah, it's sort of like an ancient version of a hazmat suit. All right, and then let's talk about the cultural reactions to the Black Death. So, people truly did believe it was the end of the world, and there was this new group of Christians called the Flagellants, Flagellants. I think it's from the Italian flagelli. They rose up in 1348, and they thought that this Black Death was the end of the world. It was the rapture, and they said, we're all eventually going to die. So what should we do? We should reenact Jesus's last day on earth. We should basically go almost all the way to crucifying yourself. They usually didn't go that far, but as you can see in the picture, some people do. And these flagellant guys, they marched barefoot through Europe. They whipped themselves. They cried for their sins. They said how bad they were. They asked God for forgiveness. And they carried crosses around, tried to really emulate what Jesus did. So I guess you could say these guys had just sort of given up hope, saying that the end of the world is nigh, so follow the Bible to the highest decree. All right, let's check out these pictures. So here are these guys carrying crosses around with them, praying to God. Here are the flagellants. A lot of them didn't wear shirts. Here's another one. They're just whipping each other. And then, there's some modern versions of Christianity that actually do stuff like this. Like, these guys whip the heck out of their backs, and they're bleeding, and they're asking God for help. And some hardcore guys in the Philippines, they actually crucify themselves to show their faith in Christianity. They don't obviously die. Maybe they're left up there for, an hour or two, but that's some serious commitment. Oh, man. All right, but then there's some other people who turned away from Christianity and said, well, there's nothing we can do to stop the plague. Everybody's going to die. And this would especially happen, like, if you were a rich person and you saw a bubo forming under your neck and there's no cure, you're like, well, I've got maybe a week to live. What am I going to do? Gonna have a big old party. So that's what happened around Europe. All these typically wealthy people, but poor people would go to these things too and host these things. They said, well, God doesn't love us anymore. I'm not a great Christian. I'm going to go to hell. I've only got a week left on planet Earth. So we're going to celebrate by doing a lot of crazy stuff, okay? Just wild debauchery, gluttonous banquets, drinking alcohol, extravagant clothes, sleeping with all the women or all the men, gambling, just betraying the Bible, betraying the Christian faith. And some people could argue that this might have been step one in pushing European culture away from being 100% all about Jesus all the time. So, and this is kind of an interesting point. The famous nursery rhyme, Ring Around the Rosie. Well, back during the Black Plague, they put these rings of roses, these strong-smelling herbs, around their kids, hoping that it would protect them from the plague. But as we know, it did not. Pockets full of posies. Posies were also a strong-smelling herb. But ashes, ashes, we all fall down. It's implying the kids are going to die. So this is actually a really dark nursery rhyme. Here's just some dead people dancing. Best party ever. Oh my goodness. But thankfully, near the end of the Black Plague, people came up with some better ways to survive the plague. Modern medicine was finally beginning. People really started to think about it. They said, hey, maybe if we clean everything, and maybe if we don't touch sick people with our bare hands, that would probably be better for us. Maybe we should boil our drinking water. Maybe we should remove the dead bodies quickly. Because that was another thing they typically did. They typically had wakes. Those are sort of at a funeral when you show the dead body and people like kiss the dead body and touch the dead body one more time. Well, Europeans realized that was an easy way to spread the plague. So when someone dies from a disease like that, you have a closed casket and you put them in the ground. That's the solution. All right, so you have the plague doctors fighting the plague, and there they are carrying crosses all around. So let me read y'all this. This is from a historian, I believe. So the Black Death did set the stage for more modern medicine. It spurred changes in public health and hospital management. Frustrated with Black Death diagnoses that revolved around astrology and superstition, educators began placing greater emphasis on clinical medicine based on physical science. While schools initially had to close for a lack of educators, the plague eventually drove growth in higher education. New schools were established, sometimes specifically mentioning in their charters that they were trying to address the decay in learning and the gaps in education of the Dark Ages. That's super smart. So, cool. Yeah, here's just some more stuff too. Like, Europe got so wild during the Black Death. People who survived the Black Death era generally suffered a communal crisis of faith. Rather than becoming more religious in thanking God for their survival, people began to harbor doubts. They had turned to the church for an answer to the plague, and the church offered no help. Additionally, priests who, along with doctors, had the highest rate of contact with the disease, also had the highest rate of fatality. Several new heretical movements sprang up. Those who still clung to their faith were more likely to do so in a personal manner, and many people began to build private chapels. Okay. And a really effective thing that they came up with during the end of the Black Death was as soon as someone got sick, they were like, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to lock them inside somewhere. It can be their house, it can be a hospital, it can be another building, but we're not going to let anybody interact with that person. So this idea of quarantine was created, where if you suspected someone might be sick, you just told them, hey, stay inside for a week, 2 weeks, and if you're healthy, then you can come out and be a part of society again. Authorities in the Italian city of Venice became the first to formalize these actions against the plague, and they closed the city's waters to any vessels or travelers for 40 days. That was pretty extreme, 40 days. They probably could have got by fine with 7, but they didn't want to take no chances with the plague. All right, here's another one. So in Milan, they sealed up 3 houses with the people inside after plague was discovered there. The Milanese authorities could certainly be firm. From 1350, they decreed that all future plague victims and those nursing them would be isolated in a designated pest house built outside the city walls. Yep, go outside. We don't want no people dying in this city. All right, now let's talk about the world of Islam. So almost all the information I gave you guys was about the Christian world, but I need to be very clear. The world of Islam probably suffered even more than the Christian world during the Black Plague. And yeah, it's really sad that some parts of the Islamic world, I'm going to even argue, never recovered from this. Even now in the year 2020, they're still so far behind where they were, 800 years ago. And here's the statistics that show it to you. So the population of the Middle East in the year 1000 was 40 million people. But then the population after the Crusades, the Black Death, and the Mongol invasions is now 8 million people. So what does that mean? Islam lost 80% of their population. That's crazy. And their population only got back to 40 million in the year 1850. So they really got left behind in history. And the Arabic word for a disaster is the Nakba. And I would absolutely describe this period of Islamic history as the big Nakba. When you lose 80% of your population, it's not looking good. Not looking good for the home team. All right, so yep, the plague hit in the Middle East. And yeah, let's check this out. The Black Death ravaged much of the Islamic world. Plague was present in at least one location in the Islamic world virtually every year between 1500 and 1850. Plague repeatedly struck cities in North Africa. Algiers lost 30 to 50,000 inhabitants in one year, again another year, again. Between 1701 and 1750, 37 large and smaller epidemics were recorded in Istanbul, and additionally 31 in Baghdad. Yeah, and the plague's just constantly wiping people out. It's super sad. And yeah, that's it for the Black Death. All right, peace out.